Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be attempting to get my 1970 Bug started. This is going to be a will it run video to see if we can finally get it going. For those of you not familiar with this car, I did already make one video on it telling the whole backstory and everything, but if you guys aren't, here's the motor on this car, 1600 dual port, and the obvious thing that has happened is it caught on fire. This is pretty common in these cars, especially when people run fuel filters back here with no hose clamps on it. So that's exactly what happened. Popped off the fuel filter right here, got gas all onto the distributor, and then it caught fire and burned everything up. One thing I already did before this video was I started to make the new wiring harness for the back of the car. The old wires got really burned up when the car caught on fire, and pretty much none of them were usable and all had to be remade. The first thing I started with was going straight to the firewall and tearing off the sheathing on the wiring up there. That way I had access to the fresh wires. And then from there I remade each wire individually, figured out the wire size, made the wire properly with soldered ends on it, heat shrunk everything just to make it all nice and have a good seal. And then I finished it off by connecting them back to the good wires via a butt connector that was weatherproof. So those get heat shrunk on, so it's a really nice seal. And then I finally went through electrical taped over all those connectors, so it's just an extra security thing, and then put this looming over it just to clean things up. So you can see I already have the wiring done right here. And this one is for the generator, and I'm really happy with how it came out. Like I said, all nice soldered connections with heat shrink. And then I've also heat shrunk these 3 wires alone, so it's its own separate loom from everything else. So I'm really happy to have all new wiring for the back of this motor, and it should work really well. The first thing I need to do is to get the car actually moved, because it is in kind of a bad spot to work on. I want it moved right here under the shade where the 92F1 build is. So I'm gonna get these swapped right now, and then I'll show you guys what parts we have for the Bug. If you guys are new to this channel, we've built this whole truck in our garage. So if you guys are interested in off-road trucks or fabrication in general, definitely go check out some of the videos on this thing. But we gotta get this thing moved. Yeah, baby. I'd say that's a little bit better. Got some shade, and I put down a little padded blanket because I'm an old man and like to be comfortable while I'm working. So we're all set up outside. So let's go down to the parts pile. As you can see, we have quite a bit of parts to throw on this thing today. Starting on the left, I'm gonna be doing oil. I'm not gonna do an oil change right away. I'm gonna run the car for a little bit and then change it once everything's hot. But I'm running this Valvoline stuff. I've heard good and bad things about it. I heard Castrol and Kendall's kind of what you want to go with because of the viscosity over time. Doesn't seem to break down as much. But this is currently all I have in all the parts store had, so I'm going to be putting this into the car. And then I also got some spark plugs just for some normal maintenance stuff. The ones on the car are probably fine, but since I'm replacing the wires, coil, and the rest of the ignition system, I'm just going to be replacing the plugs as well. This is your standard gasket kit for the oil screen at the bottom of the motor. I don't have an oil screen though because I'm dumb and forgot to order one, so this is going to stay off for a while until I get a screen, but we have that ready to go. And here we go, got the coil. This is the Bosch blue coil, what everyone seems to swear by. So I spent a little bit extra money since they do seem to be harder to come by now, but I decided to spend the extra money and get this one. Moving on, we have an EMPI air filter. This is their tall version, so it should flow some air. I know a lot of people swear by the stock air filters, but I just ordered this one. If you guys think the stock one's better, let me know why and maybe I'll swap it back. We also have some Bosch spark plug wires. Bosch seems to be the way to go for a lot of VW parts, so I just ordered their stuff. And then moving up a little bit, I do have an accelerator cable. I don't know if the one in the car is stretched or not, but I'm just going to replace it anyways in case it is. That way we have a fresh accelerator cable on there. And bam! I'm really excited to get this thing installed on the car. For those of you who are VW guys, you know what these 2 wires means. That means we're running a pointless distributor, so we don't have to deal with points or condensers or anything like that. I know a lot of people have some mixed feelings about these things, but I'm going to throw it in the car and see how I like it. And then moving on, we have a 34 pick 3 carburetor, which is standard on these motors. The one on the car is all burnt up and has a dent in it that I saw that I'll show you guys later. But this one is not brand new, but just slightly used, so it's going to be a big upgrade from stock. And there's no return spring, so I just ordered one of those as well. So we should be all good to go here. And then the last thing I got was a new belt. The one on the car wasn't bad, but I thought I'd just swap it out anyways for a fresh belt. That way we know there's no stretch in the belt or anything like that. Hey, Hey, don't be tearing up my blanket. Don't be... Oh, dude. Come on. Now that we have all the parts, we can start working on the car. And the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is pull out the vacuum and get all the dirt out of here. Because when the car caught on fire, whoever was driving it that noticed the fire got out and put dirt all over everything to try and put it out. So I'm going to get a vacuum, clean that out, and then we'll start pulling things off one by one. Wow, just that made a huge difference. This thing already looks a lot better. Vacuuming and blowing everything out, got this all nice and clean in here. Everything is looking how it should. And just from pulling off this distributor cap, a bunch of stuff already came back down. So I'm gonna have to blow this thing out again. But wow, that looks way better than just a few minutes ago. You can see right here how burnt up everything is. None of this is usable, so this is all going in the trash. I probably could reuse this distributor if I were to rewire this, so I might just keep this on standby just so I have it in the future if I ever need it. And like I was saying with the carb, right here you can tell there's a flat spot in it, so that was definitely impeding some airflow. So the new carb should bring us a little bit more power. And one thing I'm also concerned about is you can see the throttle right here is stuck open. Normally on my other car that would mean there's a bunch of gas down in the motor, but these cars with this carb have an idle solenoid, so if it doesn't have any power, if the key's not on, there shouldn't be any gas that's allowed to go down to the motor. So there shouldn't be gas in the motor, but I'm going to check anyways when I pull the plugs, because it should be sitting right there in the chamber if there is gas, or worst case it got in the oil if the rings are bad on this motor. So I'm gonna check there, and then I'm eventually gonna change the oil anyways, so we should be good as far as fuel. The next thing I'm gonna do is pull this coil. This is just two 10mm bolts right here that are holding it on, so that should come off really easily. And then carb if I can get to it. If I can't, I'll probably just have to remove the distributor, but that should be after that. Well, we're certainly making progress on this motor. I went ahead and got the coil off, as well as the carburetor, as you guys saw, and I covered up all these little openings just so we get nothing down inside of the motor. After I got that stuff off, I went ahead and started cleaning everything. So you guys saw this. This is really good before and after right here. Looking really good. Just got all that char off of there from everything being burnt. So that cleaned up well. And then just got some of this cleaned up as well. And the reason I pulled off these little tins down here is just to paint them. So those got paint with Steal It, and they are currently drying. Now that things are open down here, we can get a view down at the exhaust, which is going to eventually get replaced. And this right here, for those who don't know, is your heat riser tube. So that comes from the exhaust, wraps up, is attached to the intake, and comes back down to the exhaust. And that just allows the intake to warm up a little bit. That way there's no freezing. So that's what that's for. Just from the degreasing and everything, everything's starting to look really good. And you got to be careful of that stuff because it will eat paint and it will dry out your hands quite a bit if you get it on yourself. So go wash your hands if you get degreaser on yourself immediately. That way you don't have to deal with that. But man, it makes such a difference on these cars. Now I'm going to move on to replacing the accelerator cable. One thing I like to use when installing the accelerator cable on these cars is some sort of grease. So I'm going to be using this marine grease. Using this just ensures that the cable is not going to be chafing anything. It's going to be sliding in and out nice and smoothly. Right now we're inside of the car right by the pedals, and I've pulled up the carpet to gain access to everything. And one thing that I just noticed is this brake line right here. Usually that gets rusted out and blown apart, but this one looks either brand new or just in really good condition, so I'm really happy about that. And right here is where your accelerator comes out of the tube. So behind here, might be a little bit hard to see, it just keys in and you have to get some pliers and wiggle it out of there, and then you can pull the whole cable out of the tube and get your new one installed. Alright, so the new throttle cable's in, and that was a little bit more difficult than I thought because there's the main tube that the cable runs in, coming to about under here, under the car where it pokes out. And then there's another sleeve that it goes through before finally going into this last guide tube. And getting it into that middle sleeve was a little bit tricky. I had to get under the car, and I didn't jack it up or anything, so I did it at basically ride height. And it was really difficult, but finally we got that thing in, and now we can get the car back on this thing. One thing I want to ask to all of you VW guys out there who know a lot about these cars is, one, is this for the factory intake? Is that what this is for and why it's blocked off? And two, what is this thing right here? I think it has something to do with vacuum advance of some sort, because this line ran to the vacuum advance port on the carburetor. And then the last thing I want to know is, what are these hoses for? Because I know this one goes down to a little box outside of here and then comes back up with this hose, and this hose just ends up in these springs right here. So not really sure what that's for, and I'm not really sure what this is for either. So if you guys know, just leave a comment down below, because I'm curious to know what these things are for. Here's the old carburetor and the new carburetor side by side, and you can see how burnt up this thing is. And here's the spring that was on here before. So this was the return spring, that's why I had to get a new one, so that thing's just gone. Here's the rest of the fuel line that's on there. And then again, you can see that dent right there, right in the carburetor. I also have a new idle solenoid, so that one got pretty chewed up. And this one looks to be in really good condition, so we're good there. One thing I did notice is right here, so you have the two little studs that are supposed to be coming out of here, but we only have one, whereas this guy has two. So I think that one of these studs got pulled out of here, which is exactly what happened on the carburetor on my other car. I'm going to try and pull this one out right here and swap it into here and use some JB Weld and just make sure that it's really tight in there and that it's not going to be coming loose. Well, there we go. That went really smoothly. I thought for sure it was going to be really hard to get out of here, but it was actually just hand tight. So I got it out of this one really easily. And I thought the threads on this one were going to be messed up, but they ended up being really good. This thing's in there tight, and I got some red Loctite on there just so this stud is never coming back out of here. The way I got the stud in was just your standard double nut method. So you put two nuts on there and lock these together, and then you can spin the whole stud in, and it ended up working out really good. Everything went smooth. Bam, there we go. Now I finally feel like this thing's starting to come back together. So now that we have that in, I'm going to start getting this wiring hooked up to the generator. So you can see there's this little tab right here to run your wires through, and then when you get them where you want them, you just close these shut a little bit more. But on this factory generator, normally your main power wire is going to come to this channel right here. And then you're also going to have a green and an orange wire. And from factory, you should have the green one going to this terminal, and then your orange one going to the one back here. My wires are different colors because I remade them, but I marked the orange one right here with a little blue mark on it. So I know that one goes back there. Our main power is going to go here. And then we're going to have our green one, or what's supposed to be green, go to the one down here. So these are just 8mm, and then you have a Phillips head back here, and it should just go right together. Getting ready to install these spark plugs onto the car. If you take a look at the end of the spark plug, that's your standard tip that you're going to be seeing on most plugs. But for VWs, if you take a look at the plug wires, those two are not going to work together. So what you actually have to do is take a set of pliers, and you're going to unthread this, and you'll end up with this one, which I just did. You can see it's just threads, and then that will pop right into there. So just make sure you do those two things before installing your plugs. And just a reminder for those doing this as well, if you just use a 13/16 socket, that's going to work good. And I'm also going to throw some anti-seize on there before I throw these in. I just got done replacing the spark plugs. You can tell these things have definitely had better days, so it's good that we finally replaced them. When you're doing this, just make sure you have some anti-seize to put, where is it? There you go. Some anti-seize to put on your spark plugs. That way, when you go to take them out again, they're not going to be seized in there, and just always throw a little bit on there. Now moving on to getting this distributor swapped out with the new one. I have set this right here to 7.5 degrees, and you line that up with the split of the case. So this is top dead center, that's 7.5 degrees, and then that's 10, I believe. And so I have it lined up at 7.5 with the split. And this right here, the rotor, is lined up with the little slit right here in the distributor. So now I'm gonna pull this one out and get the new one slid in. The weird thing about this is there is no slit to line things up with. So what I'm gonna do is get this drop down in, get the cog lined up down below, and then I'm gonna set it just approximately to where I think it's gonna go, and then I am going to statically time it. But it's time to get this thing pulled out and get the new one swapped in. So we're back out here day 2. I really did want to get this thing finished in one day, but with the whole fuel line thing, I just wouldn't have been able to get that done. Fortunately, I was able to order some off of Amazon, the same German made stuff, and it's going to be here today. So we're going to get this thing running today, hopefully. And back here, the last thing you saw me do is get that distributor in there. So since then, I've gone ahead and timed it, and you do that by setting the pulley to 7.5 degrees like I showed you guys. And then where the negative side of the distributor connects to the coil, you're gonna put your test light onto there and then ground it somewhere else. And then you're just gonna adjust the distributor back and forth until you see that light just flicker on. And right when it flickers on, that's where you wanna time it to. So that's all done, the timing is set on the bug. And then I also made my vacuum line that goes to the carburetor. Made that out of some spare brake line. And the reason I have this kick right here is if for some reason fuel was to get into that line, it's not gonna go straight down and destroy the diaphragm within the distributor. It's gonna have to go uphill first, which isn't likely, so that just prevents corrosion of the diaphragm in the distributor. I also went ahead and just added these 2 little plugs onto the carburetor where there was vacuum ports that I will not be using. So that's all plugged up, not gonna have any vacuum leaks now. And right now I'm getting ready to install the new belt on this thing. One thing you need to be mindful of when you're doing this is there are shims on this side and on the inside, and just adjusting those shims back and forth will adjust the tension on this thing. And right now I already have the nut loose, that's why there's so much play in here. But you can swap those back and forth to get the desired tension, and I like between a half turn and a full 180. That's where I like to keep the belt tension on my bug. So you'll see right now as I'm pulling this off that will have some shims. So you pull that off, then you have this little spacer. And then there's one shim right there sitting on top of there. And then there's a few more just stacked up on here. So I'm just gonna pull this off. Do not lose any of your shims. And then there goes your belt. And if you do have the little cover plate down here, that needs to come off. Mine is just sitting on here right now, so I should just be able to pull it. All right, that is out of there. And the belt should drop around and come right out. So I'm gonna keep this one just as a backup in case my other one breaks. But here's our new one, I'm gonna pull it out. So before I put this one back on there, I'll just set it in there for now. I am gonna coat this pulley with a little bit of paint just so it looks fresh, and then I'll get everything back together. I'm just gonna keep the shims all together because you don't wanna lose those. So there we go, that one's ready for paint after I prep it. And one other thing I've been working on is getting everything ready for the new fuel lines. I went ahead and pulled the tank, and right when I started to lift the tank, I saw a bunch of gas just shooting everywhere. That's because this fuel line was so brittle that it just cracked as soon as it got any sort of movement. I have a little piece here just to show you. It's just all dried out and brittle. So this definitely needed replacing. It's a good thing that I'm doing it because it was definitely overdue. So as soon as the fuel line gets here, I'm gonna go ahead and replace the fuel lines here, all the way under the car, and then I'm gonna put the filter under the car right about here, and then I'll make the rest of the fuel lines, and then we should be able to get the plug wires on there and then start this thing. All right, so we finally got this thing all together. Fuel line came, and it's been probably about 45 minutes to an hour. We did the whole car, gas tank back all the way to the carburetor. And just to take a look at all the old stuff that we've torn off this motor, got the carb, the coil, distributor, cap, and just a bunch of miscellaneous wires back here that I had to rewire. I did throw the battery on a trickle charger, so it should have enough charge to crank over the car for a while. and it is going to take a couple seconds to start just because it has to bring fuel all the way from the tank all the way back to the carburetor. Since that's all new line and a new carburetor, there's no fuel in there, so probably going to be cranking a little bit and then it should finally turn over. Since the last video, I have gotten the interior wrapped up a little bit more, got all the seats in there finally, and did fix the vents, so that looks a lot better. It's not all cracked up, and I just flattened it out and painted them and they look a lot better. But we'll get to the point of this video. Let's get this thing started. Shoulder wide, cleared out. So I'm sure a lot of you guys have guesses as to what the problem currently is with the car. I did recheck timing and we're spot on with timing. Static method with 7.5 degrees before top dead center. The other culprit I thought was the carb or the gas. So when I did put the tank back in and make the new lines, there's nothing in the tank, and I put probably about a half gallon worth of gas in, and it was older. So I got some fresh 91 that I just threw in, so another gallon and a half of that. So hopefully it was just a mixture of bad fuel. And when I checked the carb, I did notice that the adjustments were quite a bit off. So I reset the volume control screw to 2.5 turns out, which is where you should start. And then the bigger one for idle, I'm about 2 turns out on that one. So with the new fuel, I'm gonna try and start it and see if that helps. Maybe it was just a thing with bad gas. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to end up editing all this together, but I want to give a brief summary of what happened last night when we were trying to get the car started. When we were first turning it over, it would run a little bit, but mainly just backfire. So I thought we had a timing issue. So I rechecked the timing and it was still spot on. And then I checked for spark and we had really good spark. So I knew that the timing and the spark was not an issue. So then I thought we might have a fuel issue, and when I remade all the fuel lines, the tank was empty and we threw about a gallon of some older gas in there. So I thought we might just have a problem with some old gas. So I went and got a bunch of fresh 91 and put it in the car and tried starting it. That helped a little bit. The car did run better, but we were still having a bunch of backfires and it didn't really want to idle. So then I moved on to the carburetor because I didn't check any of the fuel screws on this thing before I put it on. And sure enough, the volume mixture screw was like all the way out, which it's not supposed to be that. It's supposed to be between 2 and 3 turns out. So I set that at about 2.5, which is what you're supposed to start with, and the car did run a lot better. That is sort of where we were at last night. One of the issues that I think we are having now is when I could get the car running, I would keep it at about constant pedal, and it would run really good, and then it would run really bad, run really good, run really bad. So I think we might have a vacuum leak. When I replaced the carb on this car, I did not replace the base gasket that connects it to the intake manifold. I forgot to order one of those, so I ended up using the old one. So this morning I went down to V Parts and got 2 fresh gaskets, one just to have as a backup. So we're gonna be installing one of those to try and help the issue, and I'm just gonna pull the whole carb apart and clean everything out and reset all the fuel mixture screws and everything. So that way when we put this thing back together, it's like we do have a fresh carb on there with the right settings. So I think once we do that, we're gonna have a lot better luck getting this thing running smoothly. So right now, I did already get the carb off the car. So everything is sort of stripped back down. And I have it on the bench ready to get blown apart. And like I said, I did grab those 2 base gaskets, and then I did grab some carb cleaner as well. So now it's time to just tear into this thing and get it all cleaned up. Those of you with the keen eye noticed what I did in that time lapse. I ended up kind of swapping over a few parts from each of the carburetors. So this is the carburetor that I'm going to be running on the car, and it's running what was the burnt up bottom end of the old carb, and I'm keeping the top end that was off of the new carb. And the reason I didn't just use the complete old carb was again because of that dent right here, and I'm not sure on the condition of the choke. So I'm using the top end off the new carb, and the reason I'm not using the bottom end off of the new carb is, one, you have these vacuum ports, which I don't really like. I don't need them, and this one does not have those ports on there. And also for the jet that goes in the side right here, here is what came out of the new carb. So it's a little bit weird. Usually you have your jetting on there, just like this one, which came out of the old carb. So it's a lot easier to clean this one. I think you can get down in there with a smaller screwdriver and pull another jet out, but I don't even want to deal with that. I'd rather just use the VW style. So that's sort of where we're at, and that's the reasons that I kind of swapped some things over. So this thing is all ready to go now. I did reset all of the fuel settings on it. So this fast idle screw right here, this is not your idle speed like on the carburetors on my other Bug, but on this carb, the way you set it is you take it all the way out until there's a gap in between this little cam and the threads, and then you go just until those threads start touching the cam, and then an extra quarter turn. So that's the setting for that. And then these other adjustment screws down here, the default setting is 2.5 turns out for both of them. So that's what it's set at, and hopefully we should just be able to throw this thing in the car and it just start right up. Alright, this is the moment of truth. I just got the carb on there and everything's hooked up again. I'm gonna try and start it and let's see what happens. Yet again, it is a new day. I spent most of yesterday just trying to figure out what the issue is, and I went through a bunch of different things. I ended up pulling the carb apart again, just double checking everything, and then I went on and pulled all the spark plugs out to see if for some reason one of the gaps was off. Even though I checked it, I was just double checking all my work. And when I went to put all the spark plugs back in, one of them was stripped out, so it'd go in and then it'd just keep spinning. It would not seat all the way. So I'm not sure if I did that or that was something that the previous owner did, but either way, it was something that needed to get fixed. And so what that was probably doing is just causing a vacuum leak and pulling air in right there, which was causing some of the issues that I was noticing. So I went over to Napa and got a re-threading kit, which includes a little insert and a tap so that you can tap it out to a bigger size hole, put an insert in, and then put your spark plug in. And when I was doing this, I was very careful not to get any metal down into the motor. And I probably got a little bit, but hopefully it gets all pulled out once this thing starts running. The other thing I did notice is I checked the valves this morning just to make sure they were all good. And there's kind of a big issue with that. All of the valves were tight. I think they were set to 0 tolerance, which is not good. You want each of these to be at 6 thousandths. So I reset them all at that specification, and hopefully this thing will run a little bit better. And the last thing I noticed was the exhaust. So right down here, this connection right here was backed off. So there's an exhaust leak right here. That's all fixed now. So everything should be tidied up. I just need to get the valve covers back on this thing, which I have getting painted over here. And once we get those on, I can throw all the new oil in there and try and fire this thing up. Here. go drive this thing, just see if it is bad gas still, if that's an issue, which I wouldn't think it would be that, but never know. Car drives really nicely, brakes good, clutch is decent, horn works, but it just will not idle. Coming to a stop, or just idling in general, it just wants to die and I have to give it some gas. Alright guys, I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. I have about 4 days invested into trying to get this thing to start. I think we got it first started on day 2, but we've just been trying to work out all the little errors and get it to run right, which it's still not running perfect. It will not idle. At this point, I'm not sure, like I was saying, I'm not sure what to try. I think I am going to give it a compression test just to see if all the cylinders check out. I'm sure a lot of you will suggest that as well. But if you guys have any ideas of what this could be, please let me know. I have the carb set at 2.5 turns out for each thing. So I think the carb checks out. I messed with the choke a little bit, but it's right where the little 3 lines are. Everything's lined up there. So it's like the stock setting on the choke. Will not idle with the choke off, which is telling me that it's running too lean. So maybe I need to give it more fuel. But also when I'm driving it, if I rev it, it takes a little while to rev down, so it doesn't immediately rev down. So maybe that's a sign of a vacuum leak as well. But any suggestions, please give them to me. I'd love to get this thing running great. But there you have it. That's the first start under my ownership and the first drive. So if you guys like this video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.
Oh yeah, what the?